Okay, welcome to the course. It's the first module. I'm very excited. This thing is called What is an Economy? And we're going to talk about the basics of what an economy is. And that might seem like a very rudimentary question to you. It is, but it's also an interesting question because we think about the economy a lot, but we rarely think about what an economy actually is. Let's discuss how we generally feel about the economy as humans. We know it's this large thing that exerts great pressure over the possibilities of our lives, don't we? For example, if interest rates are high, it means we can't buy the house we like. We can't spend as much money as we want. Maybe we can't go to school and become educated. If the unemployment rate is high, it means we're going to have trouble getting work. If prices go up, if there's a lot of inflation, we can get less of the things we like. Our family might not get the groceries it wants. We might even go hungry. So that thing, the economy, has almost a godlike pressure on the possibilities of our lives. But we also know that it's a thing that humans invented. We know that it involves people. So the economy is not just nature. We're not talking about nature putting pressure on our lives. There's a big storm and all the food production facilities are destroyed. That's not necessarily the economy. The economy, yes, it exists within nature, but the economy is a specific thing made by humans that has its own inertia and its own ability to greatly impact our lives. And you might be surprised to find out that that idea or that structure, that system of economy is very new in human history. It hasn't existed for very long. Now, usually economists and in economics intro textbooks, they will go down throughout history to try and find the first mention, and usually they talk about ancient Greece. A little over 2,000 years ago, Xenophonte in Greece defined the economy as a system of production, distribution, and consumption of goods within a community or a country. So it's a system, it's a human made thing. But it was not defined as this sort of all powerful, all controlling type thing. Actually, the word economy just means household management. So even when the ancient Greeks were talking about economy, they were more talking about, I don't know, did you drink too much wine and you couldn't afford enough potatoes for your family to eat for dinner? That kind of thing. It wasn't an all powerful system. It was some sort of human system, but it didn't exert extreme power over your lives. Fairly recently, the great social science thinker, economic anthropologist, and historian Karl Polanyi wrote about the time when the economy became this system that exerted a godlike power over our lives, when we started to obey the economy instead of the economy obeying us. And that was written in Karl Polanyi's great work, The Great Transformation. We will talk about this work numerous times throughout the course. But that is the time of transition where the economy really became, and especially a particular type of economy, a market economy, a system of prices, came to exert its control over humans. More recent publications also have expanded on that, of course, but this is sort of the foundational piece of research on when the economy as this large, all powerful entity first emerged. And that was only a couple of hundred years ago when this large economy that was all powerful emerged. The book was published 50 or maybe 70 years ago, I guess. So this is incredibly new in human society, that we have a thing that we call the economy that's human made, that has sort of godlike impact over our lives. And our economy, though, when we look at it, tends to have three different forms if you look at the research. The first one is a communal economy. This is really the household management type of economy. It's not an all powerful human system that's exerting power over us, although it can exist within one of those if you have modern communal economies. But for 99% of human history, these communal economies were not part of this great economic system. They were really interactions with nature. And the communal economy existed for 99% of human history. The next sort of large type of economy you start to hear about, and this usually started with the development of agriculture very slowly and emerged very slowly, is the centralized state economy. That's kind of your very authoritarian dictatorships or very regimented bureaucratic society that was often associated with agricultural societies, but can be associated with more modern variants of economies and societies as well. Then finally, the market capitalist society. This is that thing, that group of markets that just emerged as the type of economy that just emerged maybe a couple hundred years ago. It's very new in human history. So if the centralized state economy was only present in maybe 0.8, that's less than 1% of human history, well, the market capitalist economy has only been present for maybe 0.2% of human history. Not very long. But there are some important points just to remember about these three main forms of economy. First, that none of these are really natural. They're all created and invented by society. They're patterns of behavior in which we decide that are the ways that we have decided to consume goods, to get the things that we need, etc., etc. None of these things, point two, is necessarily needs to be attached to only one time in history. All three of these forms exist, for example, today in our economy. And yes, we needed the agricultural revolution somewhat to arise before we could have centralized state economies or market capitalist, for sure. But really, there were more centralized state type economies existing in some hunter-gathering societies as well in kind of ancient history or even prehistory. Point three, the most current economies are actually a mix of these forms. There's no pure economy. And if you look at your country that you live in today, you will actually find these three forms present throughout, mixed together. There's no pure form of economy. And the fourth point is that these economies could appear under any political structure. There's not necessarily a particular structure that is defined by any of one of these. So you can have communal economy under democracy or dictatorship, doesn't matter. Centralized state economy can exist, and we'll show examples of it existing under democracies, and market capitalist economies can exist under a dictatorship or under a democracy as well. So the political form is not connected to any particular economic form. So generally, economists, especially when they're talking about modern economies, divide the economy into three major groups. These are producers, consumers, and the government. So here's a typical graph that you might see in an economics text about market economies. The producers are firms. They make goods and they sell them to people. They can sell them either to the government or to consumers. Of course, each of those consumers and government give money for those goods, so they pay money to the producers. But producers also pay money to consumers because consumers are the workers usually, and they work for a living. And how else would consumers get money, right? Governments also purchase from consumers, but they also tax. Governments purchase from producers, but they also tax producers. And governments give benefits to consumers like roads, hospitals, and education systems, etc., but they also take money from consumers through taxes as well. It's interesting when you look at this diagram, though, a couple of things come to be apparent. First of all, if the producers do not have workers that they're paying money, they're not able to sell their goods because there's nobody that can buy their goods unless the government buys it all. So producers kind of need workers, right? In a way, they need workers to have money to buy goods and services, unless they think that the government's going to do all of the buying. Another main thing that comes up when you will look at this is, where is nature? This is a classic model of an economy, and but we know that all the goods that producers make use materials from nature and also create waste that goes in nature. So it's kind of in a bubble box here that and nature is excluded in this depiction. Of course, we also know that the economy doesn't just exist in nature, it exists in something called human society. So we have to discuss a little bit what is society. Um, First, we'll go to the common dictionary definition from Merriam-Webster Dictionary 2025. Society is an enduring and cooperating social group whose members have developed organized patterns of relationships through interaction with one another. So it's something bigger than humans. It's in the interactions that they create sort of belief systems and structures and patterns of behavior that the people come to internalize in the society, right? So this is more clear when you look at a real sociological definition from a foundational sociologist, Emile Durkheim. A unique, objective reality distinct from the individuals composing it. It's a reality that is distinct from the individual. So society isn't just individuals added up, it's individuals working together to create something that's larger than themselves. Society influences and constrains them through social facts. Society is a collective phenomenon formed by the interactions of individual consciences, leading to a greater synthetic reality built upon shared norms and beliefs, or collective consciousness. So again, the idea of culture, shared beliefs, norms, ways of living, patterns of living, institutions in which we live, created by humans, that really creates the humans themselves. Man, if you can, this is going back to ancient Greek philosophy right now. Here is Aristotle in 350 BC. Man is by nature a social animal. An individual who is unsocial naturally and not accidentally is either beneath our notice or more than human. Society is something that precedes the individual. An individual doesn't make up society. Society creates the individual. Individuals are not possible without society, he's saying. Anyone who either cannot lead the common life or is so self-sufficient as to not need to, and therefore does not partake of society, is either a beast or a god. That's very astute of Aristotle. He's saying that we are created by the society itself. We obey its rules. We are constructed of it. We cannot escape society, and if we do, essentially we're dead, unless we're a god. We can look at it as an example of suicide. Actually, Emile Durkheim did a famous study in suicide, which was one of the foundational studies in sociology. Suicide cannot happen to just individuals. If you look at sociological theory, it really can only happen to individuals in a society. Why? The main cause of suicide is being left out of society, feeling you're on the margins of society, pushed away from society. Loneliness, right? That's the main cause of suicide. So even something like suicide is socially caused. It shows you that individuals cannot make those decisions alone. So what we can see here, the economy is embedded in society. But as Partha Dasgupta has suggested, both of those things should be thought of as being embedded in nature. So here we have sort of a more holistic, a more realistic model of society than the one we saw in the last slide. Here we have the economy, people doing stuff, companies doing stuff, even governments doing stuff. But that's within the society that creates it, that is dependent on it. And of course, society and the economy are both dependent on nature. So then, what is economics? Well, if you look at the most common textbook definition, you'll get something like this. It's the science which studies human behavior as a relationship between the ends and scarce means that have alternative uses. What does that mean? This comes from Paul Samuelson, whose really introductory textbook has been copied by almost every introductory textbook in economics since his 1948 text. This means that economics is science of choices. We don't have as much as we want. We only have a certain amount of resources, but we want a lot of stuff. So how are we going to decide what to get with the resources that we have? And that's kind of what it is. It's become a science of choice. Humans in this situation will choose this. Companies or firms in this situation will choose this or should choose this according to economic science. So economics helps consumers and businesses to understand the economy to decide what choices and strategies to take. But that's a pretty big job. I mean, it's pretty important that economists have a pretty important job, clearly. But it's more than that, because economic science also helps societies and their governments decide what kind of economies to make. In the best sort of democratic societies, you would use evidence, science, data to see what worked here, what doesn't work there, what can we expect to work for us to make societies that work best for our social goals, right? So that's a pretty big job. We have to remember that economics is a social science. What does that mean? It uses scientific method to study the social construct of the economy. Remember, the economy is socially constructed. We invented it. So we use scientific method, to study that thing. So what does that mean? First, we use induction. There are two ways that we study using scientific method. First is induction. That's you make observations and measurements using particular methods, and you gather information, data, right? And you create a theory of how the economy works. So you look around, gather data, and see, oh, look, the economy is working this way. Here's an example from economics, the law of demand. Maybe an economist looked around and saw, well, for this item, Kraft dinner, when people's incomes go up, they buy more of it because they have more money. Oh, that's the law of demand. As incomes increase, they'll buy more of the stuff they like. Law of demand, through induction, through looking at the data. There's also deduction. That's when you first create a theory and then you test it with data. So maybe using the law of demand again, oh, I have a theory. People, when they get more money, higher income, will buy more stuff that they like. Okay. So how do you test that? You just watch what happens when people's income increase and you measure if they bought more stuff that they like. And if they did, then your hypothesis checks out, your theory checks out, you've done a deductive scientific study. And economics is and should be based on this scientific method. Economics is also an abstract thing, though. When you think of the economy, you're in your own head, aren't you? You're not looking at a thing that you can touch and feel. It's something that's abstract. So theories are simplifications. Economic theories are simplifications to describe the phenomena that we can't see directly. So in a normal economics textbook, you have a lot of theories there that are simplifications of reality on purpose. Reality is very complicated and you can't describe it exactly. So you have theories that are simplification of reality. This can lead to a bewildering and shocking discovery for any person who decides to learn economics beyond the intro texts, however, that much of what is taught in normal ECON 101 introductory economics courses is actually wrong. And that's kind of crazy when you realize it. Much of, say, an undergraduate student in economics, you'll go through many courses on economics. You'll do a lot of math on supply and demand and utility functions and this and that, comparative advantage, all the things that you learn. You do all this math and you kind of try and perfect those techniques. And then you get into grad school, maybe not even until you get into your PhD, and then all your professors are saying, oh yeah, all that stuff is really wrong, and we think the interesting stuff is to study where economics is wrong, where economics 101 is wrong, where your introduction texts to economics were wrong. I mean, that's all wonderful if you're training to be a professional economist with a PhD, but most economics students just take the one course, if any course at all. So they actually leave an intro economics course with kind of the wrong idea about how economics works. Well, that's kind of the point of this course, is to correct that a little bit. in conjunction with a normal economics class. But there's something really important to understand about economics. This saying, the commanding heights, has been attached to the discipline. If you're in charge of the economy, it means you're in charge of the society because you handle the money, essentially. So economists' thoughts are really influential in the design of economic systems. So the design of those very systems and the power within it are truly where the power lies in our society, according to this theory. And in the past 200 years, our society has given the economy itself a lot of power instead of the economy being controlled by society. The society is more and more controlled by the economy. We have started to obey it kind of like a god. And that's really interesting because it's just us. It's the economists who have designed that economy. Economists working with politicians and business people, really. John Maynard Keynes, this guy here, is probably the most influential economist of our time. And this is probably his most influential quote. He said, "The ideas of economists and political philosophers, both when they are right and when they are wrong, are more powerful than is commonly understood. Indeed, the world is ruled by little else. Practical men who believe themselves to be quite exempt from any intellectual influence are usually the slaves of some defunct economists. The ideas of economists have shaped history, shaped the way society is formed, its economies, shaped the way that society itself is informed. So it is vital to understand the economy as it actually functions and to understand the politics and thinking behind the continual redesign of the economy. It's vital to understand that in order just to operate as a competent business person or a citizen in a country. A normal ECON 101 course provides important analytical tools and definitions to help you understand an economy, but it's too abstract and simplified to be useful in the real world on its own. So what we want to do is take those tools of Econ 101 and interject real knowledge in the way that actual economists study the economy. And that's what we're going to do here.